There was a dark shadow hanging over our heads for almost 9 months now. And at my age and in my family circumstances, conservative people, God-fearing people, to be accused of such a heinous crime was a terrible, terrible shock and completely unexpected. And now for the newspaper to retract it. They will remove a lot of sorrow from our lives, but there's still a long way to go to really come to terms with our new circumstances. And the next time I see a guy that smirks at me, then I can say, well, you definitely did not read Rapport of the 14th.
I think what we need to explain to the viewers is that in this controversial book, the names of 2 ministers were mentioned.
Yes.
A 3rd minister was not mentioned. Then a week later, you spoke to the newspaper and said you believe, judging by the description in the book, that they're referring to you. I think most of the public didn't have any idea who they're talking about. I didn't know. I knew it could be one of 4 people. I didn't know which one. Why did you decide to come forward?
Well, you know, I received, even on the day of the publication, I received so many phone calls and messages. So many people, hundreds of people recognized me immediately. Because, you know, if you look at the 4 criteria, you know, they were all 4 running for president. And, excuse me, I was the one that came second. Okay. And the second criterion was that the person must have a house in the Tsitsikamma area. That was me, and not one of the others. Secondly, that person must have been at least once on Robben Island, on Bird Island, virtually the same thing for me. I was in prison for the last 8 months. And that left only me. So, and on the Friday, prior to that expiry of that first week, one of the reporters, a senior reporter by the name of May G. De Veer, of Media 20 or News 24. She arrived at my holiday home, not looking for a 3rd minister, but looking for Barend du Plessis. And she was asked to leave, but she was there to take a photograph of my house.
But that was a journalist.
Yes.
I think most of the public would not have known that you've got a holiday home,
Sure.
but you felt you needed to come forward.
Yes, I did. And, you know, if I didn't come forward, if I waited until today, I would never have been able to defend myself. I would never have been able to bring some consolation to my family. I would never have been able to really concentrate on what were the parameters of this huge blunder that was made and try to address it in order to rectify it.
You spoke about you've been to Bird Island. To clarify everything, how did it come about that you went to Bird Island?
I have a house 150 kilometers west of, or southwest of Port Elizabeth. And the previous year, me and my family, we erected a house. There are only 11 stands there. And so 1986, December, was the first year that we could really be there as a family in our new house. I received a phone call. There weren't any cell phones then. I received a phone call from my secretary. She was still in the office, telling me that Mr. John Wiley's office had sent an invitation to me to join him and Magnus Malan and some other people, most of whom I had never seen in my life, and I didn't see any time after that, for the opening of a quay, a guano loading quay on the island, but also bring your fishing rods. There may be an opportunity to fish. And I'm a very, very keen fisherman. I accepted that invitation, and I was duly delivered there in a helicopter, an Army helicopter, Air Force helicopter. And with me was John Wiley and Magnus Malan, and another fellow, I think Philip Myberg from Swellendam.
And there were no children on the island when you were there?
No, the youngest person was a classmate of my eldest son. They went to Monument High School together, and they grew up together, in fact. And I was so happy to see him. I hadn't seen him for a long time. He was doing marine biology research on the island, and I spent an awful lot of time with him. His bungalow was right next to mine. We spent our time fishing, talking, and just socializing.
Alet van Rensburg Wright of Fokus joins us now on Skype to talk a little bit more about this. Alet, a very good evening to you, and thank you so much for talking to us. So, just generally, what did you get out of the interview?
Well, it's very clear that former Minister Barend du Plessis is very adamant that he was not involved. And he also said on the Fokus program that he is convinced that none of the National Party ministers were involved. And he wanted to clear his name. He explained what it did to the family. And, you know, that's basically the gist of his story that he told us.
And I suppose that comes down to Rapport's apology on the 14th, which he mentions, and the fact that they say, due to the fact that we're the kind of newspaper that we are, that we should have been a little bit more careful about publishing the claims in the book. Are they saying the book in its entirety is unfactual?
I couldn't really say from the article. I read the article, but it seemed to me from the last sentence of that article that they were rather saying they should have handled it differently. I can tell you there have been a lot of messages going to a lot of journalists, myself included, who have been covering the story, and we've all been told that they want an apology or they want a correction. Now, from our side, I've never mentioned names of any ministers because I just felt I haven't spoken to any of these witnesses or victims, and it would be dangerous to mention people's names if you haven't spoken to them yourself or you know what the evidence is. And what worries me at the moment very much is, yes, I agree. If people feel they've been aggrieved and they've been accused of something they didn't do, yes, by all means, it's got to come out and they've got to say it. But what worries me is, what about the victims? Very little is being said about the victims, and I have no doubt in my mind there's so much indication that there was a paedophile network busy in the Eastern Cape. Most probably, you know, it could be that they're still busy because networks don't just disappear. And I'm saying it for several reasons. I'm saying it also because our Fokus viewers contacted me over the last few months and spoke about this blue combi that was also mentioned in some newspaper reports where they claimed that this blue combi was seen, and it was alleged that this combi would kidnap children for a paedophile network. Now, a lot of schools apparently also warned the parents and sent out letters. And some people have even told me that there were times when they were sent home from school because the combi was seen in the vicinity of the school. So there is something, I believe. And I believe
there was also reaction to the tragic news of the suicide of Mark Minnie, and his name obviously comes up in this articles around this publication, articles around the apology, and some even seem to hint that he knew there was no concrete evidence or there was sloppiness on his side. So what is the general feeling about the credibility of the book? And I hear you say there clearly are victims, but what about what is contained in the book? Because it goes as far as naming people, as you say.
Yes, it's very difficult to say because there are two groups. There are the people who believe it and the people who don't believe it. I, as I say, cannot say who was involved or who the pedophiles were because I never investigated that part. But what I can say to you is we spoke on Fokus, and I remember correctly, I think Full View also used the interview with Gavin Evans. Now, Gavin Evans was the journalist who wrote the article for the Playboy magazine in 1995. And in that article, he wrote about these allegations. He had spoken to Mark Minnie, and if I go back to that interview now, I listened to it yesterday, the description that he gave of what happened is exactly the same as what's in the book. And he did this interview with us in August last year already. He also said that he spoke to this doctor who allegedly treated this child who was allegedly wounded in the hospital, the child where they claimed that a weapon was pushed into his anus and that he had very serious anal injuries. And he said the doctor admitted to him that he did operate on a child and that he admitted that those were the injuries, but he didn't want to say anything else. So we've got no idea who's responsible, but to me there's too much indication. And what's interesting about last night's interview with Mr. Barend du Plessis is that he said, when I asked him why have these allegations never been investigated, he said to me, but they were. And he said, Mark, many did investigate it. But he said that the docket wasn't stolen.
Thank you so much, Alet van Rensburg Wright, the executive producer of Fokus. And that brings us to the end of the program.
It does indeed. Still, of course, developing news you'll be able to watch through the evening and keep a close eye on with Herman Mashaba, Alexandra, the fire at Notre Dame. It has been a very busy evening.